All right, everybody, we're back again. With this is chapter three. We're going to be. I'm just going to do a little bit of review. I can't do a real lengthy one because of the nature of the recording. But I want to. There's a couple areas in here I'd like to cover, and then if you've got any questions on some of the other concepts, you can always send me an email. Um, We'd like to announce again that our first exam will take place on Monday and Tuesday. I'll open up that exam very early in the morning on Monday, and then you'll have from that time until midnight on Tuesday. I close it at midnight on Tuesday, so that means you'd want to start well before, because the exam's going to run for an hour and 10 minutes. So I'll have it open for an hour and 10 minutes. And I'll give you the particulars on the first exam via email. And also, I'm going to give you a test review, and you're going to find that under the at the bottom of the syllabus. You'll find, I haven't put it up yet, but I will do so after I get the videos loaded. But I'm going to do an exam review there. And basically, what I do is I give you a little more narrow window on the concepts that's going to be on the exam, so you can usually I list what those areas are, and what I'm telling you with that list is these are the areas and other concepts that you need to study a little more closely because they're going to be on the exam. The exams are all 50 multiple choice true false statements. For the most part, multiple choice. They vary from test to test how many true false statements I'll have. But anyway, I look forward to your test review, and during your study time between now and Monday, you can always email me with any questions you might have on any of these concepts. I'll be glad to answer your questions. Chapter 3, the final chapter before the first exams on culture. And the chapter starts out looking at the challenge of defining culture, some of the critiques about basically the problem is looking at the homogeneous nature of the concept in terms of how people fit within any particular culture. And please study some of these challenging areas. But nonetheless, what's important about the study of culture, regardless of the arguments, is that human beings are the products of culture. So our social selves are not the product of nature. Uh, we're not born with culture. So one thing we for sure we can say is that human beings universally are creatures of culture. That we take a sense of self in our interaction with others. Our values, our norms, and beliefs are established through the socialization process, which is the next chapter. Through the process of learning. So culture is not something that's innate to human beings. Uh, we may have an innate ability to learn culture, that is, having proper brain chemistry and size. But culture itself is a learned process, it's not a biological process. We're not born with culture, we have to learn it. And that begins, immediately at birth all the way through the life cycle until death. We're always constantly learning more about our culture as we go through life, and as well as culture changes, we have to learn different. For example, with the advent of the internet, a watershed in recent history of cultural, technological, material culture development, we've had to learn all kinds of different aspects of how to use the computer and how to communicate online. We even have different cultural symbols now with your icons, right? In interacting, chatting online or talking or discussing online, we use some of these symbols, emotion symbols, and others. all that has to be learned as we go. And so culture is a learned process. It begins at birth and it doesn't end really until death. Um, there's two aspects. Just briefly looking at what are the two major. Well, first of all, let's look at the definition of culture. In the book's definition, I'll use. There's several ways of defining it. They always come out the same, but there's some shorter versions than others. Uh, for example, in cultural anthropology, which I teach the intro to cultural anthropology, the the definition is simply the whole way of life of a people, both non-material culture and material culture included. So everything basically human, we can talk about it as being derived from one's culture or from a hybrid of cultures. And so I'll say something about that when we talk about subcultures. But anyway, the book distinguishes with this definition of culture from society the way of life of a people, more specifically the human created strategies for adjusting to the environment and to those creatures, including humans, that are part of that environment. And then society, to distinguish culture from society, sometimes we collapse the two. Society is a group of interacting people who share, perpetuate, and create culture. So society is a group of interacting people. And culture is what we share together in terms of our norms, our values, beliefs, and also our material culture. So there's, as the book states, we in this chapter they're talking about North South Korea, but analytically, a sociologist would use any of these concepts to study any kind of culture, whether that be a national culture, a regional culture, or even something like, for example, a deviant subculture, a street gang, for example. We would use these very concepts to put a frame on our analysis to point us to what we should be looking for in terms of looking at the culture of the group, so to speak. So material and non-material aspects of culture. Material aspects is simply all of the artifacts that the people make, whether that's some ancient tribal society or even contemporary tribal society, and the weapons they make, how they make their homes, their hunting tools, and other aspects. Even when they borrow tools from other countries, maybe more advanced tools, they still utilize them in a way that it's meaningful for them. So that any material artifact that is either made by the people or incorporated from the outside is called the material culture. And the non-material culture, which is really important for not just this chapter, but for several chapters as we go forward. Material culture is made up for, one of the most important non-material cultural aspects is the components would be language. Language is a symbol system that's utilized by people to communicate. And without the development of that symbolic system, humans will not be able to communicate verbally, as well as make meaning out of nonverbal communication. The way we use our bodies, our expressions, and what they mean, what that might mean to one culture might mean something totally different to another culture. So language is essential for cultural learning, cultural knowledge. And then derived from that, we develop together. Non-material culture deals with norms, values, and beliefs, and we'll be dealing with these more in chapters to come. But let's just look at just to definitionally clarify these so that we don't get these confused. Beliefs, for example, are conceptions that people accept as true concerning how the world operates and where the individual fits in relationship to others. So beliefs is how a people actually see the world as actually working. So, for example, a tribal society, a belief, when they look at a tree, they might have a belief that the tree houses the spirits of their dead ancestors. That's a belief, but it's not myth to them. It's something that they believe is actual. The belief that the world was once flat, that belief that's the way they actually perceived the world as being, how it operated. It was flat. And what's important about studying people's beliefs is that if you want to understand what makes people do what they do, one thing you have to look at is their beliefs. People have bank their behaviors on what they believe to be true, right? A belief, and there's many. So you can try to think of some other examples, and of course the text has others. Uh, uh, and then the next one, in terms of how do we distinguish between beliefs and values? Beliefs are conceptions of how the world actually operates. Values is more or less how people would want reality. We can think of as values as being a part of a culture's ideal culture. It's how they view themselves in terms of what they value, and what they value in that society becomes how they would want the world to operate. So let's look at the definition here. General shared conceptions of what is good, right, appropriate, worthwhile, and important with regard to conduct, appearance, and states of being. So values what guides our behavior in terms of our standards for ourselves, but also what's worthwhile. So, for example, in American society, we have a high value on individualism. We believe in individual effort towards success. Our culture is just saturated with images of individualism, very hard to escape. And so that hinges upon our value system about individualism. We see the individual as being responsible for both success and failure. We tend to take our eyes off the groups in which the context in which group context in which we succeed or fail, if you will. So look at some other. We value democracy in our society. Another value we place on equality. It's part of our vision for the future, so to speak, or it's our goal, visual. It's our society's valued goals, if you will. This is what the society. If we're not there yet, at least we have these values that we're working toward. So we know that we don't live in a country that's fully democratic, and also we're not in a country that certainly not in a country that has a lot of social equality. Right now, with especially the wealth divide between the 1% and 99%, is so vast, the inequality, it's very laughable to say that's a state of equality. Nonetheless, the value system of society, we have that as a value to at least have a vision towards working towards. You think about all the social movements of the 60s that were banking on the value of equality in society, overcoming prejudice and discrimination, especially institutional discrimination. All that is based in our values of what we think of as good for our society. Other societies may not share those same values, and it may not even be a goal. Democracy or equality may not even be a valued part of that society. They're not even looking. They're not even moving in that direction, so to speak. So, beliefs is about how people believe or see the world as actually operating. Values is how they would want it to work, their ideals, if you will. Norms, we'll be seeing that in other chapters. Norms have to do with the written and unwritten rules that specify behaviors appropriate for any given particular social situation. The norms of behavior. The normative, we talk about in sociology, the normative order. The normative order is how norms are arrayed in that society and governing every day. The do's and don'ts, if you will, of the society. There's two types of norms generally that we look for, and you'll find these in every society. So one analysis is to gather what are the folkways and what are the mores of that particular group or that particular society. It varies from one culture to the next. But folkways, we can say, are norms that apply to the mundane aspects of everyday life, the minute details of daily living. So folkways are many in number. In contrast, the other type of norm is called a moray. And mores are norms that people define as critical to the well-being of a group. Violation of mores can result in severe forms of punishment. So one way that you can one way we can infer about what the folkways and mores are of a society is to see how people are punished, what kind of sanctions are given out when they're broken. And usually for folkways, the punishment it will be informal and will not be a severe form of punishment. So, for example, when we break a folkway, generally the sanction will be informal. It'll be a stern warning, slap on the wrist, if you will. Maybe it could be as something like in a peer group being banished for a while from your friends or peer groups because you didn't do something they approved of. Maybe you broke a group norm. Maybe hanging around with other individuals that don't fit into your peer group, so they ostracize you because you're hanging around with the wrong people. That kind of thing. But that's still seen as an informal punishment. And there are many of these. I mean, folkways there's just thousands of them, right? Mores are few in number in a society because they deal with the most important behaviors that are seen as threatening to the group's survival. So in our society, you take the Ten Commandments and you can go down the list. Killing, raping, pillaging, stealing, right? If you look at these, they're all fall under formalized legal laws, and when we break these, we can be severely punished. Of course, it doesn't have to be that severe. Even things such as we have mores about driving drunk, for example. So if you get caught drunk driving, what happens? Most of the time, you lose your license. You might do a day in jail or two. It depends, but it's not like you're going to be executed for it. It may get worse if you're second, third, fourth, fifth offender. Then the form may get a little worse, right? You could get some heavier sentencing. So any kind of formal sanctions or breaking laws, it could be anywhere from getting a speeding ticket to getting the death sentence, and or it could be losing your job because you broke one of the mores of your employment. So mores and folkways can also be at what we call the micro level, everyday level, depending on what context you're in. There will be different defined mores and folkways with the various subcultures that we belong to. But just remember that folkways are informal norms. They vary from one culture to the next. Mores are few in number, and the sanctions against breaking the mores way more severe. Of course, we can get in trouble internationally when we don't understand the folkways and mores. So what might be a folkway in one society might be a more in another society, and so we can get in a lot of trouble. Sometimes we have a lot of miscommunication, cross-cultural miscommunications, and we experience culture shock because we don't understand that society's folkways, for example. And so sometimes we can get into trouble when we don't have the knowledge about these, down to things such as how you greet one another, how you tell your host at a dinner how good their food was, how you compliment. For example, in Japan, burping out loud after dinner is a folkway. It's a positive folkway. It's telling the host that you enjoyed the food, right? In traditional Japan. In the United States, if you burp at the table, your dad might pop you on the head because that's a negative in our society. So they're both folkways, but one's a positive folkway, and the other results in a negative sanction, right? You may get sent away from the dinner table, for example. Uh, okay, so now I want you to go ahead and read about symbols and language. We kind of talked about that. And also look at the role of geographic and historical forces in the development of culture. And here it's looking at a lot of examples from North and South Korea. Then it talks about the transmission of culture, and it talks about culture as being a learned process, and it's the importance of the role of language in learning culture, one's culture. Uh, and then it talks about the individual experience. People are products of cultural experiences, but are not cultural replicas of one another. That is, any two individuals can be raised in the same culture and still have different, different beliefs, different interpretations of situations, for example. So it's not homogeneous, and there's a lot of room for play at the individual level, and that's what they're discussing here. If culture was determined human behavior completely, then we would be more like robots than human. The humans at the everyday level have the ability to reject cultural norms and values and beliefs. And then when we get to the chapter on deviance, which we usually think of deviance as something negative, I'll talk about this same issue because I make the claim that deviance is really what makes us human after all, and makes us unpredictable. And that's why sociology is not a hard science. We can't predict 100% what an individual is going to do. What we bank on is probabilities. What's the probability that a kid raised in an inner city ghetto will become a gang member, for example? What's the likelihood? But we can't say 100% that kid raised in a ghetto is going to become a gang member, because we see a lot of examples that kids don't do it, right? And human beings have the ability to say no to what society expects of them. That is, we can reject aspects of our culture. So then it comes down into it's sort of a chicken and egg question. Which came first, the individual and then culture, or did culture come first and then the individual? And really the proper answer to that is they both came together. They came at the same time. You can't have one without the other. Symbiotic relationship or dialectical relationship. So what we say then is that it's culture that creates individuals. We individuals are creatures, products of our cultures. In terms of our use of language, our values, norms, and beliefs, our mores and our folk ways, the do's and don'ts of everyday life, our style and culinary practices. All those are cultural, but it's also individuals that create culture. So we're both products of culture, but we also work to create culture as well, and that's through a process again of many times being deviant, of not going along with the cultural patterns. Sometimes groups come together, like with the civil rights movement, to change cultural patterns. And so people see that they have varying needs from each other, and will come into what we call cultural clash over issues. Also, it talks in here about cultural diffusion. That's how culture is shared from one people to the next. And when we talk about globalization, this is a period we're in now that cultural diffusion is certainly a big aspect of cultural analysis these days. And we can talk more. In the first chapter talks about the problem of defining culture that's been made more problematic with the process of globalization and the revolution in technological information systems, such that I would say that today, yes, we all have a home culture. We all grow up in a national culture where we do share a background of norms, values, and beliefs, but we're also one of the last concepts in the chapter. We're also all products of many subcultures as well. which are smaller scale cultures within a larger culture and there's myriad subcultures that we can belong to. Some that we're present in, and sometimes we may be simply present through being exposed to information outside of our local context, like for example through the media, through internet. So I would say that more and more we're products of hybrid cultural backgrounds. We have both a national cultural identity. We may have aspects of ourselves that's informed by international cultural patterns, such as food and styles and likes and dislikes in terms of music, for example. But we may also belong to more local subcultures that influence our way of looking at things, regional subcultures, professional subcultures, even deviant subcultures for some. Uh, so we'll talk more about that as we get to the chapter on deviance. We'll spend some more time with that. And then spend some time with the ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. Ethnocentrism is a perspective that we make moral judgments of other people's ways of life based on our home culture, the culture we're raised in. And the mistake we may make sometimes is it's called naive realism. Naive realism is the notion, and I won't test you on that, but it's the notion that my way of life is natural, and I think everybody around the world also has this same outlook. Shares the same values and beliefs that I do. That's naive realism, or that people in your the neighborhood next to you all share the same values and beliefs and outlooks, and they may not. Right? That's called naive realism. Ethnocentrism is to make moral judgments of superiority, inferiority based on one's home culture. So to be ethnocentric would be that you think that, and in the United States, America tends to be, as all groups are, all countries are, well, we tend to be, ethnocentric in our view when we state we're the greatest nation in the world, or our way of life is the greatest way, and all other countries should emulate us because we're at the pinnacle of history and development, for example. That's a highly ethnocentric vision. And so when we go to other cultures and visit, and then we insulted because they don't have our kinds of food there, and they don't practice everything the same way that we do. And you can see people sometimes get upset about that because that's got to be inferior. So when I took students to France one time, the students got upset a bit because they didn't have ice in their drinks, and so that rattled that gave them culture shock. They didn't understand why you wouldn't have ice in your drinks, and they do have it for people that ask for it, but they don't generally serve it. It's not part of their cultural ways of doing it, and so ethnocentrism will raise its head and they'll say, oh, that's inferior. That's the way it should be done. One way ethnocentrism works is it makes you feel that your way of life, your world is taken for granted, that it's natural, and everyone else should act that way too. And so we make these moral judgments that those people must be crazy because of the way they eat or dress or talk or interact with each other, some of their beliefs, religious beliefs, whatever. And that's incorrect. Well, it's short-sighted, and one of the positive aspects of ethnocentrism is that it one thing that we found is that it seems to be an aspect of all group, whether at the everyday small groups all the way up to nation states. We find this phenomenon of ethnocentrism that's been with us for hundreds of years. So if it's so widespread, then it must be playing some kind of function in society. It's not something that's just a few people do. It's something that seems to be universal among all groups of people. So it must be playing some kind of positive role for society, as the functionalists would say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this and start another video right away, so that make sure that this video will be held on YouTube for us. So Let me stop and I'm come right back.